we were gonna do like a reading today, right? We were gonna like
Hmm.
each do a little bit of a reading of our stuff and
Yeah.
then have a little chat.
So yeah, should we do the readings and then we can have a chat?
Give
Right,
us a little intro to what you're going to read. Or tell
I
us a little
will.
bit about what you write as well, because not everyone will know what your genre is and what you're going to read from. And give us a little intro, and then we.
Yeah, I like this cross-pollination of readerships. It's nice. It's exciting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I write science fiction, fantasy, detective serials. Basically, that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. It's a sort of semi-anthology series, so you can kind of dip in on a particular story, but it all ties into a larger piece as well. And I was trying to pick out a chapter that would make sense in complete isolation, which was a bit of a challenge. But I found a little snippet of a particular piece, which was kind of like a one-off chapter called The Writer. And this particular one is set about 500 years into the future with a particularly disgruntled writer, which I thought just seemed appropriate for
Who
the
that could be?
occasion.
Is this from a published book, Simon, or is this from what you're publishing on Substack?
This is for the serial that I'm doing on Substack. So this one went out a couple of years ago. I think I've been serializing Tales from the Triverse for like 3 years. It's ridiculous. I'm nearly done.
Well, because I wanted to point out to listeners that Simon does the thing, and so does Ben, which I point out to anyone who comes to my serialization class not to do, which is to write live to the page.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I'm also deeply impressed by it because I couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's whether it's a sensible thing to do or not is I think still up for debate, but I enjoy it.
That's the main thing, actually, isn't it? They enjoy it.
Exactly. Right. I will read a little snippet from this, and then we'll go from there. Okay.
Right.
So, the dark red wine in his glass swirled as he rotated it. He lifted it to his nose, sniffed, paused, took a small sip. It was good. He'd been saving it for a special occasion, but none of those seemed to come around, so what the hell? Turning away from the glare of the daylight, he stared at his apartment instead, full of a life's work, yet somehow entirely empty. Rita was gone. She'd had enough. No kids. He had some friends, sure, online and across town. But it's not like he was going to hail a cab to fly him north to see them, and they sure as hell weren't going to bother coming to say hi. He could call them up, chat to them on the screen, but what would be the point? The usual platitudes, talking about the same old shit. Pretending to be good, feeling like he was lying the whole time. Yeah, same old. Getting along fine, working on some projects, all good. It wasn't all good. He'd written his great American novel at age 23 like a fucking idiot, leaving him with 3 decades of twiddling his thumbs while critics piled on him for wasting his talent. There's a sophomore slump, one reviewer had noted, of his last book, and then there's a Pearson plunge. John Pearson, the most promising new fiction writer of the 90s, reduced to an idiom. He still had readers. Everyone had readers. He wrote stuff, he published it, and it got fired out to every reader in the system. Multiple planets worth of readers, plus several moons and hollowed out asteroids. Volume wasn't an issue. Even income wasn't really a factor. Hell, the royalties from that first book would keep him going. He could fire essays off into the void and the views would rack up almost by default. But what was the point? The problem was that first book, which had set him on a very particular trajectory. It'd been an accident, really. A story more serious and literary than anything he'd ever want to read himself. It tumbled out one month and set him up for life, for good and ill, and after that, he was a serious writer of serious things. He never wanted that. He'd wanted to write science fiction and fantasy. He'd wanted to dive giddily across genres, to mash them up and spit them out as something brand new. But they'd never allowed him, the critics, the readers, the online commentators. They'd had expectations and he'd felt compelled to follow the crowd. Truth was that science fiction wasn't what it used to be. Oh, to be living in the fucking dark ages, before spaceships and AI overlords and interplanetary travel. Before there were men on Mars and women on Venus. Before the Earth's decline was halted and reversed. Before geopolitics became so stable that absolutely nothing ever happened. Before the poverty line was dropped so low nobody had to worry. Before disease was good as eradicated. He longed for the good old days, the bad old days, back when you could have a good war and there was a famine and hardship and people had to toil just to survive. Back when insane old men ran the world and had their fingers on the nuclear button. Back when the ice caps were melting and oceans were rising, when forests were burning and cities were sinking. when there was so little space that people were forced to migrate en masse like fucking birds or cattle and try to find somewhere they could just be. Back before leaving orbit was like heading to the corner shop. Back when travel was hard and took forever, when you couldn't call someone on the other side of the planet in real time, before you could look up anything and become an expert in under 60 seconds. Rewind back to when humanity was crammed onto the one ball of rock and gas, and it was chips all in, double or nothing, bet the farm, win or die, when a single wrong move would nuke the entire species. That was being alive.
Oh, brilliant.
Nice.
Really great. You know, I just jump in immediately with one of the things I really loved. I love it when the domestic is set within science fiction, because it's such a, you know, because in a way, like, I don't know your work at all, right? So that first whole bit could easily have been literary fiction, nothing to do with science fiction at all, until the line about the multiple planets.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because so I love it when the domestic is writ large within a science fiction.
Yeah, that mundane is so
That's
important.
great. Huh?
Yeah. The mundane is so important. Like there's
Yeah.
there's a line Ryan Coogler said. He's the director of Black Panther and Creed and various other films, but when he was making Black Panther and he was creating like the fictional city of country of Wakanda, he said he didn't believe it until he had a market in the background of a shop and there were just people buying food and eating it. And he was like,
Yeah.
until that was there, it didn't feel like a real place. It felt like a load of visual effects. And then as soon as you could see people, like, where did they actually get their food from? He was like, oh, okay, this makes sense now. Yeah, it's those little mundane things that you have to get in there somewhere.
And even if the novel is peopled not only by humans, there's still the mundane of living, sleeping, eating, all of that. Beautiful. Loved it.
Yeah.
You write very well.
And the disgruntled writer, I think all of us can understand that. It reminded me of an old songwriter friend of mine who had a massive hit in the late '90s, a huge hit, like a global phenomenon, one that he still has royalties off of, and he never had another one after that. And I commiserated with him, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, you know, belly aching about my struggle to like have any kind of recognition or acknowledgement about my music at the time. And he's like, Ben, I don't know what's worse, being a wannabe or a has been.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got it.
I was reading about Edward St. Alban the other day. Do you know his work? They made a. Do you know his work, Simon? They made a TV show. He wrote 5 novels. Just somebody in the chat is going to know the Edward St. Alban that was turned into a 3-part TV series with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Okay.
But the first one, it was absolutely huge, and they kind of went down. They're brilliant. There are 5 novels that are brilliant, but he became very, very disgruntled. Exactly that, like, why didn't I win the Booker, and why? And so then he wrote a novel about a really disgruntled writer, which was really slammed, I think, because the industry just decided to turn its back on him. It was, he's just got something new coming out now, so I hope he does well, actually, like, take him out of the slump. But also, you've got to stop complaining. I've decided, like, I'm done with the complaining. No more.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's hard. You can get distracted by the wrong measures of success, can't you? I think it's really easy. Like no matter how you're publishing or what level you're at, whether you're like total beginner or you've had lots of success, like you can get distracted by the wrong things and then go down weird little avenues that are not actually very healthy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I ran a whole class on it, just around like what being able to like keep your ambition. Like I'm hugely ambitious, but not tie my happiness to, or at least if success is tied to happiness, then make success like just like connecting with readers, something that's manageable, and not winning the Booker, which is completely out of my hands, despite the fact that I really want it. Right. I'm always going to want it. But Bernardine Evaristo, when she won the Booker, she was very, very bald about it. She was just like, I always wanted this and now I've got it. And I thought, good on you. She didn't pretend that it was like, oh, me. That's how I feel.
Well, you just had a huge book launch, Eleanor.
I did.
Right? And you had a launch party the other night?
I had a launch
bookstore?
party. Yeah, I did.
A real bookstore? Nice.
Real bookstore, John Sandoe Books in Chelsea in London. And it was a beautiful, like, it was a really clear night, because here it's basically raining all the time and it's hard to get anyone out of their house in January. I already planning my next book launch whenever that is. It's definitely going to be like September, when everyone's just come off from some holidays. But anyway, so there were, but it was a tiny little iconic bookshop. I don't know if anybody is watching, listening, who knows John Sandoe's in Chelsea, but it's been around a long time. It's one of those, it's a bit like Shakespeare and Company. It's got an upstairs and downstairs and winding, and it's just books everywhere, and it's bonkers place. And it happens to be owned by a friend of mine's brother. So he was like, yeah, sure, we'll have your launch. So we packed it with about 50 people, and I wore my favorite suit, and everybody drank. I don't drink, so I drank something not alcoholic and had a really good time, and did a little speech. And but I think the main thing is, like, you know how hard it is to get a book out, right? And if you're British, at least, it's very hard to celebrate yourself and ask people to celebrate you. But I was like, no, I'm gonna ask you all to come and celebrate me, and they did, and it was pretty special, actually. I loved it.
Excellent. I was going to say, how do you feel about like an event that is 100% about you? Because that would freak me out.
I have to get over my Englishness, really get over my Englishness, and just be like, I remember one time I was in therapy, and I was talking about birthdays, and I would be like, no, I hate my birthday and I don't want people. And my therapist said, have you ever thought that people might want to celebrate you? And I was like, oh, okay. And actually, so that's how I look at it. I look at it more like they want to come and say, like, these are my friends. They want to come and say, well done, you did really well. And then because I always, if a friend's got a show on or something, I always want to go and celebrate them.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? But,
I just to get over myself a bit.
Are you gonna read a little bit from that book or another
Sure.
book?
Yeah, no, I'll read a bit from this book. I'm going to read the second, just the opening of the second chapter. So here it is, unless you're not had completely sick of this book, because I've been doing a lot of promotion about it. Here it is again. It's called In Judgment of Others. It came out last week. It is about psychosis in the home counties. It's set in Midhurst, which is a market town in the south of England. And just to give you context, in the first chapter, our hero, Tessa, has a psychotic episode and is sectioned. And then we go back 24 hours. So this chapter, it's called I Feel Love. I'm just going to read the beginning of it. And it's 24 hours earlier. It had started weeks ago. The tickle, the nudge, the grab, the feeling that she was hunted. A creeping sensation at her back. A sudden jerk awake in case it should catch her sleeping. She'd been feeling unwell for a while. A flutter through her veins, her heartbeat up a notch. Through the darkness and boredom of everyday life, it was the chink of a door just open. A light she could have, a promise of fun, the adrenaline rush of abandon. She could do what everyone else kept locked in a cupboard. She could break free. But it was ridiculous. Tessa, who had a home to run, a child to love, a husband who needed his dinner. Tessa, who was a member of the home counties-based middle-class community that drank too much, bragged about holidays, compared their children and flirted with each other's husbands. They didn't take hammers to cupboards. They didn't go mad. They got drunk and had sex and behaved badly, but laughed about it. Badly like their parents before them. If they got fat, they cleansed. And if they were lonely or frightened or sad beyond repair, if the unhappiness in their heart and betrayal in their gut and madness in their soul rose up like a chemical explosion that threatened to ruin everything, they did up the kitchen. There was no time for the insistent nagging to kick down doors, break free. Nowhere was it written to smash walls. Tessa didn't have time for any of it. She had a house to tidy, a rugby match to get to, supper to think of. A grey mist dampened the garden like an overcoat left out in the rain. Great gulps of autumn had flattened the harvest and slowed to a miserable sniff. She'd had 2 hours sleep, but she'd figured it out completely. She'd moved the cooker, put in an island, and redo the floor in slate. They'd have halogens and dinner parties and a sofa at the end. There'd be freshness and clean surfaces, and most of all, there'd be order. This sense of unrest, this feeling that something was wrong, was down to crappy cupboards ruining her view. If she redid the kitchen, she'd feel better. By 8:30, Freddie was running out the door, his school bag slung over his shoulder, while Scott, a piece of toast in one hand, pushed him on. But Tessa, at the table, hadn't moved. She didn't expect him to talk to her, but a kiss would have been nice. She stared at the slick of milk that had washed up over Freddie's bowl of Cheerios. What she needed was a list. She took her Filofax from the windowsill, slid the blue biro from its leather loop, found an empty page and wrote architect. Then she crossed it out and wrote builder. Get dressed, or find a builder, or tidy the breakfast away, or get dressed. She walked in circles, picking up a fork, putting it down again. She rolled a cigarette and forgot to smoke it. She stared at the damp garden. By 11:45, all she had managed was to remove one plate from the dishwasher. Her phone buzzed. Me and Roz getting quick sandwich at pub, on way now. Come?
I've read it. It's fantastic. That is just one of the many scenes where you just get so deeply inside that character's head and that perspective. And I think if you've not suffered from mental illness at all, I can't think of a better introduction to it, to what that experience is like, right? It's just so powerful.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I mean, as you know, the novel arose out of being a very good friend. It's dedicated to my impossible friend. And when I was at university, I met this person, and I've watched them go in and out of psychosis since they were 21. I've been right up close to it. I've been right up close to when they're sectioned, which if anyone's been around that experience, it's pretty brutal on all sides, which is not to say that the section system, is necessarily wrong, because anyone who's been up close to it knows that there are moments when someone is in full state psychosis, they are a danger to themselves and the people around them. So I don't have an answer to that at all. And actually the thrust of the book is not about a judgment around how mental health is treated, or some mental health situations are treated. It's about equal treatment of all mental health illnesses and states. The book puts narcissism right up beside bipolar, and also, alcohol dependency and disorganized food eating, that kind of stuff, and just ask the question, why don't we treat all of these sort of survival self-medicating act-outs the same? Why are some shamed and other ones are celebrated? I mean, you've got in your country, Ben, in a perfect example of the celebration of a narcissist and the danger. I mean, really, this is exactly what is happening. We, as a society, for some reason, celebrate narcissists, and we shame those with bipolar and schizophrenia and any other kind of and actually, having done a lot of research and talked to a lot of people, I've really come to the conclusion that diagnostically there's only one illness, and that's developmental trauma. And then we each create whatever survival
manifests
mechanisms
in different ways. Yeah.
Right. That's basically it. There's one, it's developmental trauma, and then we all expand out from there. And so we really should treat them all, with equal compassion but also equal safeguards and equal seriousness. And that's the point that this book makes. And I feel strongly about it because I've seen my friends shamed while the people in the next room are opening their fourth bottle of Chardonnay. And I think, no.
Yeah.
So I wrote a book about it.
I've not read this one yet, Eleanor, but I've been listening to your audiobook of Fallout, which I'm absolutely loving. And I love the way you read your stuff as well, by the way. But something that I'm sort of in awe of and trying to steal into my own writing is the way you can you're able to do empathy through really precise kind of mundane little details that seem like one thing, but actually mean something completely different. And you sort of do that over and over again in a way that I'm just constantly like, oh wow, okay. So you got that in that with the, making a list, or distracting yourself with things that are not the thing you're actually meant to be thinking about. And in Fallout, you've got all these people that are not quite facing up to what they're really thinking, and you kind of, the way you zero in on all these tiny little details, a lot of which seem really familiar as well. I'm like, oh yes, I remember that from when I was younger, or things that I do now even. And the way you pinpoint that stuff is superb.
Well, thanks. That's really generous. I mean, I don't know if you've both read Bird by Bird and Lamott, but I think that was a really influential book on me in terms of writing. Anyone listening, I'm sure will know there it is. Well, you know the 1-inch frame, Simon.
Well, I've only I got this yesterday, and I'm reading it at the moment.
Oh, okay.
So
Well,
I'm
the
new to
1-inch frame you will get to, because it's a device really where if you're stuck and overwhelmed by a piece of work, she'll explain it better. But you take the 1-inch frame and you just write what's in the frame, whether it's figuratively or you literally get a 1-inch frame and do that. But I know, in terms of that very kind words, like that's something that I think about when I'm looking at a scene. I am looking at details, because I think it's the details. Not only do they tell the story, but they also are really the most relatable thing. So I think it's pure chance that I've stumbled upon that as a kind of, I don't know. It's like a natural place to be for me, and I think that's a nice lucky chance that it becomes relatable. But thank you.
Yeah.
Ben, what have you got for us?
Yeah.
So I struggle with figuring out what I was going to read. I'm kind of done with Departures right now. The book that I'm currently serializing, I finished it.
Ben, can I say, are you going to publish that? Because I had to stop reading because I was busy finishing mine. So I regrettably had to, because I was listening and I absolutely loved it. And your narration is just so good as well. But I've just, the ship, I feel like the ship has sailed now, and I want to, are you going to publish it? Or am I just going to go back on?
I don't know. I mean, I've got Harmony House before that I haven't actually printed either. So I decided actually to read from Memory of My Shadow.
Oh, I love. Okay, well, I will listen. I'll just go back and listen. It's going to stay up, isn't it, on Spotify, right?
Yeah, it'll stay up. Yeah, I'm gonna leave all the books that I publish up there. They'll be behind a paywall, but
Sure.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So just a little setup for this one. For those of you who don't know this book, the protagonist, the narrator, Magdalena, is kind of it's in the very near future. She's a tech billionaire who created an artificial intelligence, but it's not that she created it. The models were already there, but she created a modality for being able to telepathically communicate with the AI. And she's sort of had this breaking point, and she's stepped away from all of it, and she's sort of at her recluse compound in the wilderness. And she started this new project where she maps personalities, because her whole thing was, to be able to create, to manifest a human being artificially in some way. So it's a little bit of a Frankenstein kind of a story. I'd never written science fiction before, and this kind of was an exploration into that. But this scene, the setup for it is she is actually doing this, interviewing what she calls a model, which is this man who's a painter. And she does this series of in-depth questions to sort of map his personality to this base model of this AI. And he doesn't know anything about the trauma of her past. And the trauma of her past was her brother was the shooter in the deadliest school shooting in American history, her twin brother. And she was a child. She changed her name and separated from it all. So no one knows that about her. So that's the backstory. Sorry for all that. So there was no thought behind you placing a gun into the crib of an infant. You just had this gun you wanted to paint, and no, of course not. I had a plan, however heavy-handed it might have been. This piece was a bit on the nose, I'll give you that, but I thought I could capture the perfection and innocence of a baby, which is arguably God's finest work, and beside it, the most significant product of humankind's ultimate craftsmanship. Then it could create an undeniable tension and Fuck, listen to me. So ridiculous. It certainly does that. Creates tension. I mean, I set the tablet down on the coffee table in front of me. You really think the gun is the best thing we've ever made as a species? No, of course not. But I don't think you can argue that there's been an invention in recorded history that's had more of an impact. Are you speaking symbolically or literally? Because I can think of a whole lot of other inventions: electricity, penicillin, the atomic bomb, computers, artificial intelligence. I see where you're going with this, he interrupts, returning to sit down. Not at all. I'm just asking the question, I say. I don't know. You're a lot smarter than me. I'm just the primitive cave painter here. Baby's good, gun's bad, he says, offering a smile. Okay, now that's just a cop-out. You don't want to defend your position or explain it. There's nothing to defend or explain, don't you see? It's art, not a mathematical proof. There's no right answer. If you want to know what I think, I'll tell you. The minute the first gun was forged and a man held it against another man, we lost something we would never get back. Sure, people were killing each other for centuries before, but the gun marked the point at which you have to be strong or powerful or necessary or aggressive to win a fight. It democratized killing. It socialized killing. It made killing a convenience, a spectator sport that you could participate in without ever getting your hands bloody. Evan's up and pacing, his hands in his hair. The pitch of his voice is higher and the rhythm of his speech is faster as he continues on his rant. That's what we do, right? We make shit and we find a way to mass produce it before we have any ability to even comprehend what the consequences of that thing might be. Watch out now. I know where this train is headed. I mean, look at you and your company. This thing you've helped bring into the world. Do you have any idea where it will take us? The damage it could ultimately do? Maybe it will make the gun seem like a baby rattle. I mean, is it all just academic to you? You make a thing because you can, because it's satisfying and solves a specific problem we don't know we have, only to create a host of brand new problems that are much harder to solve. Breathe, Maggie. Take a deep breath before you respond. Evan, are you implying that my life's work equates to the invention of a killing machine? Is that what you're insinuating? I stand now, pick up my coffee cup, and begin walking toward the kitchen. He follows behind me.
I'd listen to you to read all day. So good. I'm like, there's so much social commentary and political commentary in the work you do, Ben, isn't there? Is that do you set out with that in mind, or do you just find you always just you find that's the field you end up in?
I throw the thing as far away from me as I can get, and it always comes back. I think that's no matter what I do, I sound like myself, right? I think the thing most of us have. I do make a solid effort to try to, and this was an effort. Like I said, I'd never written science fiction before, so I put myself in a position to try and when I wrote this book or started writing it, it was about 6 years ago. It was before AI was even like something that people thought was real, and now it's quaint. It's like, oh yeah, of course it is. But and I didn't sort of give this preamble. The British voice that you hear in there is actually her digital companion that's inside her head that she can hear, but he can't hear. So
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I had the pleasure of reading it over the summer, so I knew that. But yeah, so it's amazing as well that you wrote it before. That, you know, obviously it's moving so fast. But you know, if you hadn't told us that, I could easily believe you'd written it like you were writing it right now, because it, you know, prophetically it was right on the money, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was going to ask about that as well, because I wrote a book in 2020 that was all about AI, thinking it was at least a decade, probably several decades away to any degree. And like the serial I'm doing at the moment, which I started in 2021, which was like 6 months before like Midjourney and ChatGPT and all that lot started appearing. And it's kind of weird to be writing about it while the thing is happening. When you began it, you kind of assumed it was going to remain theoretical and in the fictional context, and then all of a sudden you're having to grapple with the reality of the thing and how that affects the fiction that you're writing.
Well, and also now Ben may have thought he was writing sci-fi, but actually you were just writing fiction.
It's contemporary fiction.
Your genre got changed around you. That's what happened there, didn't it?
It kind of did. It kind of
Yeah, like
did.
does all
Yeah.
science fiction slowly transition into just being modern day contemporary fiction?
Well, that's right, and the same actually could easily be said of any science fiction. But because we're obviously, I know that we're all thinking about. I'm thinking about science fiction and the literary fiction writer, and so Simon, you definitely would say you're a science fiction writer, right? Like you're. That's yeah,
Yeah.
because yours will stray into multiple worlds and this kind of thing. But Ben, because Departures, would you call that sci-fi?
No, I mean it has like there's a supernatural element to it.
Okay.
For sure. He's a man who can basically know everyone's death date just by meeting them, but that's all he knows, and he can't change anything or do anything about it. So
Okay.
I'm fascinated with just like finding one small thing to pull on, that you can tell a story around. It's a much older story, there's no new stories, I guess, but whenever you have the ability to like suspend someone's disbelief for a minute, about something, like you just accept for that thing is true about this character, or you accept that this woman has created a little thing called a nib that you can put behind your head and you can talk to an AI, as though they're really there with you. So yeah.
But then is that the difference between what you're doing and what Simon's doing in terms of sci-fi? Because you create a premise which you just have to accept, but then you stay within the bounds of that world. Where would it be right to say, Simon, for you as a sci-fi writer, you could create the little thing that goes behind, and then you could decide that a dragon walks through the door in the next 5 minutes, and that's okay too. Would
I mean,
that be
certainly
like
in Triverse, it was built so that I could do that if I wanted to.
you
Yeah.
could do? Yeah.
But at the
So the
same time,
boundaries
though,
we set ourselves, I think I'm quite interested by that. In terms of
yeah. I mean, with Triverse, it was interesting because although it's science fiction and fantasy trappings in the setting, the actual genre of the stories being told is like police procedural. It's detective fiction,
yeah.
and that was interesting because I'd never done that before. And what I realized is that you can't really, like, if you're doing a crime story and you want it in the classical sense that the reader could try and figure out what the crime is ahead of time or who did it. If you want that kind of breadcrumb thing going on, you have to have fixed parameters. Otherwise, it's just a
Right.
nonsense.
It's not
So
fair on
like,
the reader, is it? Exactly. It's a nonsense.
exactly, like, so you can't just have like some magic spell
Yeah.
be the cause of it or something, because it's just boring,
Yeah.
or random. So I did a ridiculous amount of work before starting Triverse to kind of set those parameters, and a lot of it doesn't necessarily come into the text directly, but it means that someone who's reading along hopefully doesn't feel cheated by any of that stuff, and that it all hangs together, whether it's
Yeah.
something I'm writing now or that I wrote 3 years ago. Yeah.
I think that question of feeling cheated is such an important one, and that and I think, isn't it? Like it can often happen. I think with writers, you can that third act or that bit at near the, like, I always think it's 2/3 near the end when you get kind of fatigue and it's exhausting, and that kind of cheating can happen there.
Yeah.
That kind of, and it was all a dream, or they all lived to have that neat tie up,
Right.
and not cheating the reader and staying that course. I think is as much part of the kind of our duty. Have you heard of a writer called Joel Lane? He's published by Influx. He's writing this really weird, dark police procedural, but with the weirdest, like, supernatural edge to it. I had to stop reading it. It's brilliant, but I had to stop reading it because it was freaking me out. Yeah.
But subscribe to our Substacks if you enjoyed this. If you aren't familiar with all three of us, you should be. Eleanor has a new book out. She just read from In Judgment of Others. Show the book cover so we could see it, Eleanor.
Here it is again, everybody.
Where's your book, Simon? Hold it up for all to see.
I don't have my one book that I've actually printed, isn't it? Annoyingly, the thing I read is just on this bit of paper, which is far less exciting. But yeah, you can come find me on Write-More, which is where I hang out.
And this is mine. So.
And where in his Memory of My Shadow, is that also available on other like Audible and ebooks and stuff like that?
Yeah, the audiobook's out there. It's published by Lulu, so it's distributed worldwide in all the places with all the things, and I make millions of dollars a year off of it. So.
That's why your friends are jealous of you.
And Simon, what's your publishing plans? Have you got something coming out soon? Is something in the pipeline? What's happening?
Well, I'm I've been serializing Triverse for like 3 years now, which is the longest serial project I've done, and it's
Just
nuts.
do the and then a dragon walked in, and then just end it like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I am finishing it in the first half of this year,
Okay.
and then it'll be done. So that's quite exciting. And then I'm going to experiment with other stuff. I'm going to try and do a comic. I might try and do a video game and that kind of thing. Just like something completely different, basically.
Great. You draw as well, then? I didn't know that. Another string to your bow. Yeah.
I mean, I draw, but yeah,
Okay.
probably not good enough to do a comic just yet. But practice helps.
Fantastic. Well, just also while I've got people here, Fallout is about to be taken down because we are taking it on submission next week. So anybody who's in the middle of it, I know a few people have come forward. Let me know, DM me. I think the podcast on Apple and Spotify will stay up, but it'll probably have to drop behind a paywall as well. But yeah, everybody pray for me that some fantastic indie publisher buys it.
Excellent.
All right.
Well, have a good rest of your day or evening in the case of me and Ellen.
This was fun. Thanks everyone for
This was
joining.
fun.
So great to see all of you here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming along.
Bye.
Bye.